that could change how we tackle some of today's big challenges. As someone deeply involved in high-performance computing, I'm excited to lead Singapore's National Quantum Computing Hub, or NQCH, into its next phase as we push the boundaries of what's possible. Launched in 2022, NQCH was created to ensure Singapore is prepared in this critical field. In our first phase, we established a complete quantum computing ecosystem, covering hardware and simulation platforms to middleware and talent development. We are working with leading technology providers and industry pioneers in finance, in logistics, and the biomedical sciences, developing proof-of-concept solutions that showcase where quantum computing can have real-world impact. Now, as we enter the next phase, our focus is clear: to advance hybrid quantum classical computing, to drive real-world applications through proof of concepts, and to foster quantum talent to support industry adoption. A key part of our strategy is Kibo, a full-stack open-source quantum computing operating system that empowers researchers to deploy quantum-powered applications quickly and efficiently. Singapore's strength in computational biology and its rich health datasets provide a strong foundation for exploring how quantum computing can model complex biological systems, unlocking new frontiers in drug discovery and personalized medicine. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, recognizing the transformative potential of quantum computing in the financial services, has established a dedicated program to address real-world challenges, ensuring Singapore remains at the forefront of financial innovation. As a global trade hub and home to one of the world's largest ports, the ships that surround our shores and the vast stacks of shipping containers are not just symbols of commerce, but opportunities to optimize logistics through quantum-powered solutions. These are strategic areas, highly relevant for Singapore and beyond. But we remain flexible and ready to explore new directions as promising opportunities emerge. As quantum technology gains traction, companies will need to upskill their teams and attract quantum talent. At NQCH, we are committed to building this ecosystem through initiatives like Q-Talent, an accessible online platform offering courses for learners at all levels and workshops tailored for companies looking to learn quantum computing. Quantum computers will not replace supercomputers. Instead, their true potential lies in working together. With compute infrastructure from the National Supercomputing Centre, Singapore, we are benchmarking hybrid solutions against the best classical alternatives and exploring their impact for the industry. To bring this vision to life, the Hybrid Quantum Classical Computing Initiative, launched in 2025, will integrate quantum and classical computing resources supported by enabling middleware. The National Quantum Computing Hub began as a proof of concept, a bold step towards building Singapore's quantum ecosystem. Now, with a strong foundation and a growing network of industry and research partners, we are driving the momentum needed to position Singapore at the forefront of quantum software and applications.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have one more session to go. I hope you're having a fantastic day one here at Switch so far. Allow me to introduce the next segment as titled VC Perspective on the Quantum Landscape in the Coming Year. Are you curious what's going to unfold? So very soon, our leading investors will be sharing their perspective on how the quantum industry is evolving, what shapes investment decisions in quantum, and how they see opportunities and challenges across the regions and across the markets. I want to remind you that we do have a little bit more time for the session. If you want to send in your questions, use the QR code. Pigeonhole is where you're going to be at, and use the code BEYOND. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the next segment is brought to you by NQO and NQCH. I'm going to bring on the panelists to come on stage and also to introduce you the moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, Executive Director, Investments of SG Innovate. Our moderator today is Mr. Sian Hui Tong. Let's give Mr. Tong a round of applause. Welcome. Thanks for the warm welcome. Welcome, speakers. It is a pleasure to have you. Wrapping up day one here at Switch. I trust that you're having a great time, getting inspired. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the panel. Over to you.
Okay, thanks so much. And it's great to be, well, I don't know whether it's great, but we are the last panel of the day, so hopefully the energy levels are still up. This is going to be a really exciting panel because quantum is a very difficult sector to invest in. I know we've been doing it for the last 8 years with different levels of success, so to speak. So it's really great to have this particular panel put together by Enterprise Singapore for this session. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand the time over to them each individually to say a little bit about themselves, what stages of quantum startups do they invest in, so that sort of sets the tone, and then I'll then follow up with some questions. And I encourage you also to ask questions. These will actually go to this tablet, and then I will then exercise my discretion as the moderator to decide which ones I will ask them and which ones I won't. Okay, so maybe I will start with perhaps Christoph. Would you like to say a few words about yourself and what Quantonation does?
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation to participate and share our views. So I'm Christoph Jozek. I'm managing partner at a venture capital firm called Quantonation, which is based in Paris and in the US. We're investors specifically in the field of quantum technologies, actually, and physics, adjacent technologies. We've performed investments in 36 now, startups in that space all over the world, from Australia to France, Germany, US, Canada. We have a little bit more than 250 million euros under management through two funds. First fund that invested mostly the last few years, and a new fund that will close in a few weeks, actually, Quantonation 2, and that has already performed 11 investments. And we're also active in the field of venture building. So we have a collaboration with studios in Canada, in France, in Italy as well.
Okay, thanks, Christoph. Ben, I think you're at a slightly later stage than Quantonation. Maybe you could say a few words about yourself and the company.
Yeah, hello everybody. So Bullhound Capital is the investing arm of an investment bank called GP Bullhound. GP Bullhound has been around for about 25 years. We're very well known in Europe as a very active M&A house supporting technology founders. And about 15 years ago, we started investing as well. As you say, we're a growth stage investor. Over the last few years, we've become more focused on deep tech, but we leverage our whole network, your 13 offices, 150 people to find deal flow. I have some members of the team here. We also have an office in Kuala Lumpur. My colleague Shiril is over there. He has Kuala Lumpur's most famous podcast, so you may know him if you're in that field. And yeah, we've been hiring a lot of PhDs onto our team to kind of back up the investing knowledge that we've built up over the last 15 years. We're a growth stage investor, so for us, our portfolios tend to have companies with an average revenue of up to 100 million. So we're very much at a different stage to these guys who come in much earlier. And for us, it's a different set of issues that we have to address that we can talk to as we go on.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be exciting because I don't think we've seen a quantum company that does 100 million revenue just yet. And finally, definitely not the least, Dick, perhaps a bit about Serendipity and yourself.
Thank you, HH, and thank you to Switch for the kind invitation to speak on the panel today. My name is Dick Catlin. I'm a partner with Serendipity Capital in Singapore. We are based here. We have an office in London, and we are shortly opening an office in Boston in the US. We invest globally in companies that secure the critical technologies and infrastructure of today and tomorrow. And what that means is that we invest broadly in deep tech, but with a very specific lens, which is how do those technologies apply to the critical technologies and infrastructure that society needs to keep functioning. So that could be telecoms, utilities more broadly. It could be financial services, government, defense, intelligence. We invest in a stage agnostic way, but ideally we like to invest our first capital between pre-seed and Series A and take a significant stake and then a very active role such that we can help actually build the companies in which we invest. So we're very operationally engaged. Our pace of investments is somewhat lower than some venture capital firms. So we have made investments into 10 companies over the last 6 years since the firm was founded. We're managing about $400 million today. And we've invested in a number of those companies several times over that period.
Okay, and maybe I'll stay with you because we can start with the early stage investments first. Through what lens or how do you look at opportunities in the quantum space? Quantum is not that straightforward. I mean, there's scientific risk, there's engineering risk, there's market risk. How do you look at opportunities in this space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have a slide which, if we're able to bring that up, I could speak to. So the lens that we use when we're making investments into quantum is, firstly, we think about the market opportunity. And we think that quantum technologies represent the biggest investment opportunity of the next 10 years. So quantum computing has the potential to be the next evolution of compute. And that is going to fundamentally change all the key industries on which society relies. The components and supply chain, which are going to be essential for those quantum computing hardware systems, are extremely interesting because they're typically beyond state of the art of what exists today. And so that is going to continue to need to evolve. Quantum software, we think, is going to increasingly emerge as the hardware begins to stabilize. And quantum sensing and quantum compute have POVs and POCs that are being deployed today.
Right. And your site just came up.
That's great. So on the left-hand side, you can see some of the potential economic value that would be created over the next 10 years from the deployment of these technologies. Now, the lens that we use that differentiates us, we think, when we make investments is that we understand the demand side as well as the science. So we have assembled a world-class ecosystem, and those people they sit on our board, they sit on our investment committee, they are our senior advisors, and they are drawn from a group who have been senior executives with leading global enterprises. They're from government, they're from defense, they're from academia. And these people have made purchase decisions for this type of technology. And having access to them facilitates really disciplined execution. So we understand product market fit. We're able to introduce our portfolio companies to potential customers, and we're able to introduce them to strategic investors. And what that has resulted in, I think we have demonstrated that it's a differentiator. So over the last 6 years since foundation, Serendipity has achieved a portfolio return of 3.3 times MOIC and 4.4 times MOIC within quantum.
That's an impressive number. Maybe I'll just switch to Christoph because roughly the same stages, but you might have a completely different approach to looking at quantum startups. Christoph, what do you say to that?
Well, we have a different approach because we only look at quantum startups in a way. So I'd say that. And then I'd say also it depends because we're investors. Our first ticket can be pre-seed, seed, or Series A. Then we do follow-on investment, typically until, typically for a couple of companies and the best companies up until Series B. For pre-seed, what really matters in quantum when we see new companies is they need to have something really different to propose. Imagine, for example, a company trying to develop a new form of ion-based quantum computer. I mean, they have to solve scalability challenges, which are well known for this technology. They cannot compete with Quantinuum, IonQ, and the likes on, let's say, relatively standard science. So it has to be outstanding, differentiated, bring new attributes to the discussion. For the pre-seed, we need to have this technical approach, scientific leadership in the team first for these companies to have a chance to compete and be successful at some point. For later stages, typically, seed or Series A, we start to look at revenue generation, obviously. The thing we like quite a bit, and we see in our portfolio, take an example of a company called QFox in our portfolio from the Netherlands. They do transducers, so converting microwave qubits to photonic qubits, and then you can transport the qubits along a photonic network. Well, you see the benefit. Networking is super useful. It's challenging. I think if you do that in a quantum mechanical way, because there's huge difference in energy between the two photons. But the thing I like about them is that they were able to develop a technology that can be used at first to control optically superconducting qubits. And then the second application is really about networking. So it's easier to do the first than the second. They start generating revenues. We have built partnerships with Rigetti, for example, and other companies. And that's great because getting in revenues, it's not only about the money, but the cash. I think it changes the perspective of the company, the way the founders see the business. It helps them mature pretty fast. And that we like quite a bit with respect to companies that will come much later into revenues, for example, betting on a long-term technology. We do that as well. It's a portfolio construction, so we have some bets. We have other companies we invest in where we look for more progressivity. I think for us that matters quite a bit. There's another type of company with different attributes that's also interesting. It's software. So you mentioned software before, an application. I believe also 100% there will be a switch at some point between the focus on the hardware that we have right now to focus on the software and the applications. We have very good software companies in the portfolio, but the best are the ones where you have strong subject matter expertise. CFD experts, for example, or chemistry, drug design. They know the topic. They know how to talk to big pharma. And then they can implement GPUs, CPUs at first, because that's the technology that you have and you can use to do drug design. At a later stage, quantum processor. Same thing with CFD. We just invested in a new company in Belgium called Predict. They have sold a company to Cadence a few years ago in that space, and now they're starting a new one based on quantum processors and GPU. That's good for revenues, that's good for growth, and they're the top experts. So to answer your question, I mean, let's say it's not straightforward. It depends on the stage, depends on the segment, but we've seen a number of companies over the years who started investing in 2018. If anything, I'd say there's even more than I would have expected at the time. Progress has been great, and we see many, many good companies. More than we can invest in, obviously, but very excited about what's going on, and we see a lot of high-quality projects.
Thanks so much. And maybe then we can go to Ben, because this is where the question about which industries actually are the most interested in quantum technology, and where do you see, real money being put down? POCs and all that is fine, but where there's genuine interest and internal drive to actually look into quantum in a serious manner.
Yeah, so obviously we're at a very different stage. For us, companies come into our target area once they reach revenues of around 10 million. So we need companies for our portfolio that have really an active product that is out there selling to corporates right now. I mean, the overall strategy of our fund for the next fund will be applied AI. And within that bucket, we bring quantum in there. So we've done 2 very successful quantum-related investments so far. And to your point about how do they relate in the world today, so our first investment was in Q-Control, which is an Australian quantum company. What was really interesting about Q-Control is they've developed a new piece of technology, which I'll come on to, but they also had other revenue streams from things like working on contracts with large corporates like IBM, also all the way through to educating people at companies. So they had revenue underlying that business already that brought them into our target range for revenue. Then they've released a new product more recently in the quantum sensing space. So I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but for the audience, quantum sensing is developing sensors that are so sensitive that they can pick up signals that normal sensors cannot. So in this sense, they're using quantum sensors to find geoposition, so find where you are on the world by the gravitational field at that point. So basically, the gravity of the world has been mapped. They can tell you where you are, and when they discovered this, they hadn't realized the significance, because GPS, especially where we are in Europe, is frequently getting blocked around the war zones in Eastern Europe. And the people have been looking for an alternative to GPS. And these quantum sensors are now being rolled out onto commercial planes and also military. This is a wonderful piece of technology. So for us, they're working already with corporates. They're getting contracts with corporates. And that's a very practical use for quantum in the short term. So while quantum computers are probably a little bit further down the line, for us, we're interested in the companies that are actually making money now and also solving the problems for getting to the ultimate destination of quantum computing. Within that, there are what we call blockers that need to be solved. And in those blockers, companies will be produced that will be successful, that won't necessarily be a quantum computer, but will be part of that chain to get us there. So for us, that becomes really, really interesting. But you have to have deep technical knowledge. I'd love to pretend I have all of that knowledge, but I'm sure these guys are better than me. But that's why we need to hire academics onto the team to be able to understand that technology for the rest of the investment team to say, right, now let's look at that as a company, as a viable product.
And going back to Dick, you've invested in a few quantum startups. What are the key challenges? I mean, we talked a little bit about it, and I think both of you alluded to it in your presentation, in your discussions earlier. But what are the key challenges when you invest in a quantum startup?
Yeah, so we think that two of the key challenges for quantum, or for investors looking at quantum, are quantum is complex and quantum is capital intensive. And particularly for investors who've spent the last 20 years looking at things like software-driven business models, consumer internet, that's very different. Not every company is going to be able to raise the capital it needs in order to succeed on a standalone basis, or even survive. I have another slide if we could bring that up. Just looking at the map of the industry, which is it's not universal, but it highlights a few key names in different sub-verticals. Just to speak to the complexity, even within quantum computing hardware, there's still multiple technical approaches that are competitive, and there is no clear modality that has distinguished itself unequivocally yet. This slide I actually pulled from a deck that was 6 months old intentionally, because what I think that helps to illustrate is the fact that quantum is complex and capital intensive means that not everyone is going to survive standalone. So just going through some of the names that are on here, in the last 6 months, Oxford Ionics has been sold. ID Quantique has been sold. Atlantic Quantum, who's actually not on here, has been sold. Oxford Instruments has exited their quantum cryogenic refrigeration business, which is a business that for Bluefors is doing incredibly well, but they felt they I imagine were unable to continue to drive that business forwards. And under lasers, M Squared Lasers has actually gone bankrupt. So that complexity, that capital intensity means that it has started to drive consolidation and will also drive failures.
Okay, and that's a very nice chart, but it also drives probably the next question I have for Christoph, which is going to be a little bit more strategic and less of a, hey, what do you see, this and that. Do you, based on the numbers that of companies there, do you see a stage when there's going to be consolidation? And there probably will have to be, but is this going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years? Some level of consolidation, because not everyone can raise the kind of money needed to take it to the next stage.
Yeah, and it's happening actually. So we've seen, well, it started even at the beginning of our investments. I think we sold the first company to Keysight. I think it was 2019, 2020. So it's been going on for a while. I think it's accelerated because of the essentially publicly listed companies. IonQ in particular has been in a frenzy of acquisitions over the last, 9 months. So the companies you've mentioned have been acquired. So and of course, one driver is that VCs want also liquidity. So, I mean, that's the way it goes. It's not only strategic in the sense it makes sense for the company. It's also offer and demand. And the nice thing is there are these publicly listed companies and there are exit opportunities. So this is happening. This will happen even more, I think. So it's quite clear, I believe, that the other companies in that space will and should and have the means to do this kind of acquisition. So I think it's making a lot of sense. I agree, not everybody will survive. It's not said that only the worst companies are being sold, by far not the case, but I think, yes, it's making a lot of sense. I think, there are sectors specifically, and I'm thinking, for example, about quantum communications, quantum networks. I was expecting, I think it will happen, something a little bit more strategic, like an actor building a true quantum networks operators with the different technologies that are available. It's a market where you have small players, it's very dispersed, and I think it would benefit from consolidation from within or from the outside. Eventually by big actors in the telecom industry who would move from classical to quantum and have finally made a decision to do so. So I expect there will be also big movements in a sector like quantum networks and quantum communications over the next couple of years. Then there are maybe different dynamics. For example, for quantum computing, so companies from the start, full stack quantum computing companies have been developing also algorithms and applications, and largely because they needed to show what their computers were good for and for applications. I think this might change in the sense that they should maybe spin out their applications companies and give them the possibility to raise capital for them to focus on the qubits and the development of hardware. So that would be normal strategy in other sectors, I'd say. Might happen also in quantum. I don't know if it will happen. There are good reasons for, against, I guess, but I think we will see that as well. So consolidation and maybe some things that are a little bit different, like spin out or things like that. And it's great. I think it's a sign of maturity of the ecosystem as well. I think it's not been, well, it's been probably, I'd say, 10 years that the sector has started with well, first qubits by IBM 2013, then IonQ, Rigetti, etc. It's not that long, but I think it's a bit the sign of the age of maturity, maybe.
Right, and I'm going to stay with this topic, and Ben and Dick, you can chime in as well if you have an opinion on this. But you talked a little bit about external parties, helping or catalyzing the consolidation by big companies. I mean, telcos and all that acquiring the likes of ID Quantic or acquiring quantum communication companies because it adds to their portfolio. Do you think, and probably I'll direct this first to you, Christoph, do you think that actually there's going to be a trigger point or an inflection activity or event that's going to speed this up? In other words, suddenly the big companies realize, hey, we don't have quantum in our portfolio of products and we need to quickly get up to speed, and the fastest way is to acquire to build up that level of competence.
Yeah, I think there is. I don't think it's necessarily technical. I think it's more, let's say, market atmosphere, money getting into the sector, revenue generation. In particular, in the field of quantum communications, I think there's a lot of public policies there that have been driving the markets. I think there could be more, could be less, and we'll see what's going on in the different countries. But yeah, I know of some of these companies that are now more serious about evaluating the opportunities. But I don't think it's necessarily because they passed a certain milestone in terms of technology. We've seen in quantum communications in particular a lot of test beds. Things are getting better for sure. You can entangle and send photons over metropolitan networks. I mean, QNect in the US has done that, for example. It works well, the technology is there, it exists, it's progressing. Same thing with quantum sensing. The technology is there, it's progressing, it's generating revenues. There will be a tipping point. It's hard to say when, but the combination of all these factors definitely is pushing for this kind of operation to happen over the next 2 years, I'd say.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that firstly, having a listed share gives you a nice currency to be able to buy other companies, especially when the share price is extremely high because of the hype around the sector. So it's a very clever thing to be buying other companies. Now, we see it in lots of different industries within technology. You see that the leading player buying lots of other players. You see, I mean, Helsing in the defense sector in Europe, for instance, is effectively just acquiring lots of other types of technology and rolling it out on their platform. So I think it's a clever thing to do. I think also the AI boom has made people think that there is going to be an NVIDIA in quantum one day. Who's that NVIDIA going to be? So people are going to take bets in this sector because everybody knows the multiples that NVIDIA has created for early investors, right? So people are going to get sucked into that who probably don't know what's going on. So yeah, I mean, there's lots to play for, and if you believe everything that's out there, it's going to change the future. So people will see that as an investment opportunity.
Sorry, Dick, you had any opinion on this, or?
Yeah, so I think that before, your question was about maybe enterprises acquiring controlling stakes in quantum companies and what might trigger them to want to do that. And without sort of going through the whole landscape, I think what we can talk about is that the leading quantum companies today are forming partnerships with big enterprises where they're jointly developing customer applications. And I think for us, something like that is a real key validation. So, you know, our biggest investment is in Quantenium, which is a very large, vertically integrated quantum computing company. We think it's the leading company in the space. And I think there's credible data that supports that. They have dozens of partnerships now with leading global corporates for customer applications. And their last two capital raises, what you've seen is the same group of leading global corporates deploying capital at scale into them. And so enterprise is already deploying capital. They're acquiring equity. They may not be taking control positions yet, but I think that's already started.
Thanks. Maybe I'll just go back to Ben, and you know, so you talked a little bit about the whole supply chain for quantum. And talking about, you know, where the opportunities might be there in terms of actually monetizing something at a relatively early stage. So within the supply chain, and obviously companies that provide those fridges and all that have got other industrial applications, so to speak. Where do you think, where's the most opportunity within the supply chain that you see at the moment?
Well, definitely quantum sensing, as I've mentioned. I mean, that's got a very practical and important use at the moment. But I think we still see quantum techniques, quantum knowledge being spin out into other sectors as well. So I think we share an investment in Multiverse, actually. And I think Roman's over here. He was speaking earlier on. So, I mean, Multiverse would probably describe themselves today as an AI company, but the techniques they're using are quantum inspired. So what we're seeing is the learnings from that having a big effect. And what they've done, their technology is incredible. Their ability to compress large language models up to 95%, which is just insanely good. I mean, they're the only people with that technology in the world. And they've used that quantum tensor network mathematical knowledge to be able to do that. So I think it's not just a pure quantum company, but we're seeing these techniques in lots of other places. Again, it's a company that has good revenues from other products and has now spun out their new Compactify product, which is compressing large language models, and has huge interest from across the world. And we've just led a very large round in the hundreds of millions backed by the Spanish government. So you can see quantum having an impact in lots of different places.
Sorry, Christoph, you want to say something?
Yeah, I would add to that. I think the supply chain is a very good topic. I think that's something we're focusing on quite a bit with our second fund. And I say that's maybe an evolution from Quantonation 1 to Quantonation 2. More full stack quantum computing in the first fund. I mean, the foundations and the companies there. And now with Fund 2, for example, we've invested in Qblox. It's another Dutch company. Looks like QFox, but it's not the same. Qblox, they're doing fast electronics to control quantum computers. So generating quite a bit of revenues, actually. And definitely could be in the category of companies you could invest in, I'm sure. And that's great because they serve multiple customers. It's hardware agnostic. And it's a different dynamic as well. And we see more of that. Just invested in a spin-out from Caltech in the US on new forms of lasers integrated on chip. Could be used for sensing, could be used for communications and compute as well, classical and quantum alike. So definitely it's very attractive proposition. There are challenges with supply chain, how to scale them, what products to focus on. There are lots of good problems to have, but definitely huge opportunity, I think, for the future, and we'll see more of that. I think interesting companies coming with new solutions, cheaper, better done, more reliable. We need better lasers for everything in quantum computing. I think that's been a problem from the start. We'll see more of that, and I'm looking forward to have these companies pop up all over the world, including Singapore, and for us to invest in.
Yeah, certainly lasers seems to be a big topic, not just in quantum, but also in nuclear fusion, which I'm doing a plug for our event tomorrow. There's a conference on nuclear fusion called Fusion X that will take place, and lasers and the not so sophisticated state of lasers today is probably one of the key factors. And of course, there are great companies like Amplitude and all that from France that do a good job. Just evolving a little bit on the supply chain, because supply chain over the last few months has evolved quite a bit, given the bifurcation of the geopolitics. Do you see, the China and the US issues affecting the supply chain for quantum systems, complete quantum systems? I don't know. Anyone want to?
I think politics plays a big role in technology in general right now. These guys can maybe comment on rare earths if you're talking about that. But I think you're seeing, especially within Europe, maybe in the AI space, but also starting in the quantum space, individual governments want to become leaders in particular sectors because it has a nice policy message for voters. And so a lot of money, which is a good thing, a lot of money comes into particular sectors. I think we've seen in Australia, for instance, Australia has had a big focus on bringing quantum companies and creating an ecosystem. And we all know how important ecosystems are. So it's a great idea. But there is a political level to a lot of these new types of technology. AI has all sorts of political connotations around it and battles across the world. And I think the countries that have missed perhaps the AI boom will think maybe, oh, well, quantum is something perhaps we can grab and be a leader on and be associated with, and let's bring companies to our region and do that. And I think that's a great idea, and it will create more funding, which is a good thing. But there's always politics involved in these things.
Yeah, I think we've seen that from the beginning of national plans from all countries, including Singapore here, about how to do it, how to build a local industry. So specifically about the point about exports, I'd say now every company in my portfolio, they consider that the risk from the start in the design. You have to be careful not to have ITAR control components into your quantum computer. If you want to export, obviously, you have to select your components wisely. I mean, the lasers from a certain country might not be a fit if you want to ship your computer somewhere else. So, but I think there are alternatives. It takes time, it takes energy. Leadership needs to take that into consideration from the start in the design of the products. But I see startups dealing with that, honestly. I mean, they've got support also usually from the government about putting together policies and a strategy to deal with that. I think everybody should consider and have that in mind. I don't, obviously it would be better without these constraints, but I don't see that necessarily as such a big hurdle at this stage, at least. Until we have a Shor machine, then things will be very different, obviously. But for now, I think it's something to deal with, and it's fine, it's understandable. There's a lot of public money going into these companies, into the sector. So, yeah, I think it's a good balance. Maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, I think the reason why I asked that question is because one of our companies, obviously they didn't want to buy from Blue Force because Blue Force was more expensive. They bought from Maybell, and their fridge was held up in the US for quite a while before I think they realized that we are a friendly country and they just release it and give it to us. So, these things
actually,
do happen.
On that point, there's another side to it, which is the cap table of particular companies. We've found that there's an issue as companies grow that they may have investors from a part of the world that doesn't help their cause. So there is an issue with exiting secondary, getting shares out from particular. If you're Team USA or if you're Team China, you may need to remove some people from your cap table, which creates opportunities for investors. And actually, we've benefited from that in the past. But that is an issue too. The geopolitics comes into play when these technologies are so important and have, sovereignty issues around them.
And definitely Team Russia as well. But okay, sorry.
Yeah, maybe I could just speak to that a little bit. I mean, so everything we do in our portfolio has a dual-use application. I actually think that supply chains are incredibly important within quantum. So a lot of these components are going to be long lead items or are currently bespoke items which are specifically developed. This goes to the capital intensity of the industry, where there's going to need to be a lot of development. And talking to on the laser point, we're very interested as well in photonic integrators, in the transition to photonic integrated circuits. And those things are going to have to be from within ecosystems that are friendly to both the OEM, the quantum computing hardware, or the quantum sensing manufacturer, and the people on the cap table of all of those companies are going to have to be aligned with the country they want to sell into. And that's something that we've been incredibly careful about with our own investors and with co-investors in the companies that we invest in from formation, because that's something that you can't undo. You can't undo history. And I think it's very clear now that that is increasingly important.
And actually, that's a really interesting point, because we have $1 billion under management. We have LPs from across the world. So it's also an issue for us, because some of our LPs aren't particularly interested in dual-use technologies, right? It's not part of their mandate. Being a European investor with a war on our doorstep, we are definitely looking at dual-use capabilities, but that may not fit the criteria of our LPs. And so the bigger the fund, the more diverse the LP base, the more political hazards there are for them in getting into new types of technology that are really important right now and developing really, really well. So as an investor, you want to be able to go where the best technologies are and the best revenue opportunities are, but that may not work for everybody. And so I think smaller funds in some way are better placed, more regionally, that can really put a stake in the ground and say, right, we are maybe Team USA, Team China, or whatever.
Yeah, and I think some big VC firms like Sequoia have actually had to do that to separate their China operations from the rest of the world. Maybe, Dick, a question for you. How do you separate hype from reality? Lots of hype in this sector, people announcing this and that. How do you separate that from the reality on the ground?
Yeah, and you can understand that companies, particularly companies who do need to be able to generate profile, to generate news flow, and to be able to continue to raise capital, have a motivation to generate headlines. As I said earlier, we focus very much on understanding the demand side of how companies in which we invest are actually going to be able to commercialize and get to a situation where they generate revenue. But also, it is really important to understand the technical side and to be able to differentiate between a headline and a research paper. And frequently, big announcements are paired, where you'll get both a headline, which will come out as a press release, but then there'll also be, typically a preprint article that's published at the same time. And I'll talk about a couple of examples where, and these are not from early stage startup companies. These are from household leading, names who the people will know, which I'm not going to name publicly. But and you have a situation where someone will make an announcement like, there is a clear path to 1 million qubits from the work we have done. And that's a huge statement. I mean, on people's roadmaps, that is 5 years plus out, typically, even for the leading hardware companies. And so you read that article in the press and you go, oh my goodness, these people they're on the cusp. They've really achieved a really important milestone here. And you go and you read the research paper and it says, no qubit was demonstrated in this work. And that's a pretty stark difference. I mean, if that was a sort of a standalone listed company just focused on quantum, you'd expect a pretty significant market response to something like that. Now, perhaps that wasn't the case here. Another article, that comes to mind, which talked about a 90% reduction in error correction cost. And error correction is going to be very important in order that quantum computers can solve problems. One challenge is how do you scale the number of qubits? The second key challenge is how do you reduce the error rate? So if you can reduce your error correction cost by 90%, that's very significant. And again, if you go to the research paper, what it said is this was a good first step. It acknowledges there's still a lot of work to be done. And so, you can understand why perhaps companies are motivated to generate headlines. I think the best companies, the headlines match the research. And it's, not a hero device. It's not a one-off lab experiment. It's not a cherry-picked result. It's a repeatable result on an integrated machine that's a median of 100 or 1,000 runs, rather than we managed to do one thing one time, and we're going to then extrapolate from that what that could mean over a 5-year period.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. My colleague Callum over there put together a presentation on exactly that, going through about 15 newspaper headlines out of some of the biggest companies in the world. And then basically talking about that there was nothing behind it, really. I think sometimes they have slow PR weeks and they just think, right, let's get some news out. And they benefit from the fact that quantum is so complex that 99.9% of people, probably me included, don't really understand and just think, wow, that looks really cool, So there is a lot of hype in this sector because of the complexity.
Yeah, but I would add to that, it's not only on the company side, there's a lot of hype from universities as well, actually, from research labs. And we see press releases also from universities sometimes, especially speculating about applications that don't make a lot of sense. And that's something to deal with as well. So it's not, I would say not only the corporates that are startups or scale-ups, but only the ecosystem. It's a well-known phenomena. I think to me, one way to deal with that, and both of you, I think, mentioned that, is to have, for investor, a strong in-house expertise. You cannot rely only on consultants, on experts. If you want to frame a vision on quantum, how to invest in quantum, I think it must be internalized one way or another. It's not easy. We've had experience in our fund with a physicist hired into an investment team. Mixed feelings, I say. Need to find the right profile and people with a good fit. It's not obvious, but we'd like to see more of that. In our investment committee, there's 3 partners. 2 are physicists. I'm a physicist in my PhD a while ago, another one as well. First not, but he learned along the way. And I think that makes a difference, because we try to go deep into the science and forge a vision about whether it's possible at all or not. I think whether it takes a couple more years, that's understandable, but sometimes it's just not possible. The kind of thing that's presented to us, and that's, can laugh about it, but it's a bit sad as well. But definitely more education on VC side in the community is important. Having access to experts, but I think for VCs to understand that experts have also a certain perspective, a certain point of view. You should ask the right questions, and some questions are not the right ones, or they will answer things that are misleading just because they don't know, actually. And I think modern science is very specialized. You ask somebody about neutral atoms, a specific question, doesn't have a clue about ions. Looks the same, looks quite similar. Maybe he will say something about ions, but he shouldn't, because he doesn't have the top expertise on that. So, and I think there's this complexity inherent into the field that we need to deal with. That's very interesting, of course. That's the beauty of a job in a way, but that's very challenging. But I think it can be fixed through expertise, through people.
Yeah, we saw on that point when we were doing due diligence on one of our companies in the quantum space and looking for external independent experts to be able to give us a view on what they thought. There's so few of them out there, and the ones that are out there have some kind of vested interest in another company, that you couldn't find an external view because they would say, well, yeah, that's not bad, but have you looked at this one?
Usually one that they came up with themselves. Yes, we had the same problem when we first started out. Every professor had his pet company, pet approach, pet this, and it was tough.
And I think that quantum globally is a very connected scientific space. So actually, you speak with academics, leading academics in different countries, and they've worked together. Or someone was someone else's PhD student. They've worked in the same lab. And that's great because you can check people from a character's perspective as well as a science perspective. But also, if you've spent your life in, superconducting, right? If you were involved in the development of a specific, form of superconducting qubit, you're a pretty passionate believer in the technology. And then as an investor, our job is to be able to actually overlay, can that become commercially relevant? And I think you can't expect your scientific advisors to tell you that, because that's your job.
That's true.
And
Sorry.
usually they answer the question even if you don't ask.
They definitely have strong opinions. I suppose a question for either Ben or you, Christoph. If I were a startup founder today in quantum, would I be looking at an endpoint where I stay private for as long as possible, or do I look to list as quickly as possible, looking at how this question, the answer would have been quite different like a year ago, but ever since the Americans announced, hey, the government's going to take a position in major quantum startups, listing becomes an interesting prospect to raise valuations and all that. What would you advise your portfolio?
Well, I'm not sure there's been a direct listing of a quantum company, has there? I think they're all SPACs. Yeah.
All SPACs, yeah.
We're not big fans of SPACs, to be honest. I would definitely stay private for as long as possible. I think there's huge amounts of capital in the private markets. I think by nature of this type of business, these companies are going to be unprofitable for a long time. They're going to require a lot of investment. And I think, if you look at OpenAI, what they've managed to raise in the private markets is incredible. And what did he say the other day? Profitability is one of his not even his top 10 problems, he said. So I think you would stay as private as long as possible. The problem always is, especially in Europe, is growth capital. Yeah. So we are a growth investor, but still we can write checks of maybe 30 or 40 million. And we tend to lead rounds of maybe 100, 150 million by bringing other people in with us. But these types of technology are going to start to require large checks. And unfortunately, they're going to have, companies will have to go to the US to find that money because that growth ecosystem isn't there in Europe right now. And we all know the stories about European pension funds not investing in technology. We can go on all day about that stuff. But it's definitely a problem in Europe. I'm not so sure about Asia or Southeast Asia. But
yes, it's a problem here as well.
Okay. Just wanted to make a comment of the first part of your question about U.S. government investing in startups. I think we've seen that all over Europe for years. It's not particularly new. European investment fund has invested in most European companies, BPI France, some French funds, etc. So it's nice that other countries are looking at this model as well. And to the point, I totally agree. I think the challenge now is really to get to growth fund, whatever source, I'd say, and that's what we need. There's a question of timing as well. Most European companies are coming to maturity now. They need the money now. They didn't need that much money earlier, but now that's really what's important over the next 2 years. Several are raising hundreds of millions, and they need to find it. We need the growth funds. There was an announcement in Europe yesterday, I think, about that. Things will happen over the next couple of months. Public listings. Of course, as an investor, as a fund manager, that's also we like to see that as well. There are exit opportunities for some of the portfolio companies. Challenges with SPACs are well known. I think we can go into long debates about that, but it's a reality of the market. So I think it's good to see opportunities to raise large amounts of capital, and that it's possible. So for a long time, we were saying quantum was this, and AI was like 100 times more. We start to reduce the gap, actually, and that's good.
If I could just really quickly address that. I think it's definitely a consideration that companies are going to have to make. Companies that are commercially viable, who are generating revenue, have a path to revenue. What's been made clear this year is that listed quantum companies can raise large amounts of capital in 24 hours. Even the best private companies, that's 3 to 6 months. And that's just time to execution. It's also management time. And being able to access capital that quickly and having a liquid, potential acquisition currency in listed stock is very valuable.
Okay, I think we are running out of time, but I would like to ask the panel one last question. Headlines, 5 years from now, related to quantum. What kind of headlines would you envisage in the quantum space? Who would like to start with that?
Quantum cracks Bitcoin.
Wow, okay. That's stark enough. I'm going to have to diversify my portfolio.
QPUs overtake GPUs.
Wow, even more aggressive. Okay.
Yeah.
Going to sell my NVIDIA stock. Okay, next.
I'd say it's not a perpetual 5-year technology anymore. I mean, we're there. And according to the plan. 2030, by the way, is a good deadline. I think many companies have plans to have very interesting things by then. We have seen, like I call these technologies PFYTs, perfectly 5 years technologies. You have promises, and then 5 years later, I mean, you see where you stand, and you have another promise in 5 years. I think what I'd like to see is that being real and happening really in the next 5 years, and I think it's a good deadline.
Okay, so with that, I will close the panel. Thank you very much to my fellow panelists. Maybe we can give them a hand.
Thank you very much. And also a big hand for our moderator, Mr. Tong, as well, for asking such great questions. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing your perspective. And of course, we do have a bit more time to go. I'd like to invite you downstage to, of course, connect with our friends who've been listening attentively to you for the last 15 minutes or so. Once again, that wraps up our final discussion. Thank you, Mr. Tong, for driving the convo. And once again, that wraps up our day one. Could you please give our gentlemen another big round of applause? Thank you. We did so well. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to tell you what's happening tomorrow. Will you be back? Please say so. You will be back. So we will see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. That's where we will be starting. And we'll be kicking off with brand new tracks, making a debut on our Beyond stage this year. Now we're talking about AI and robotics track before we transit to exploring AI for materials in the afternoon. Now, concurrently, there will also be an Edged AI and Robotics Masterclass hosted by AMD. It's going to be at 10 o'clock in the morning. And also, it will be following a session that's called Small Smart Nations, Deep Tech Collaboration and Capital Attraction across AI, robotics, and materials edge computing. From 2 p.m. tomorrow, we will move into exploring the frontiers of embodied AI. And if you haven't downloaded our Switch app just yet, please do so before you go home today or visit us on our website.